Welcome to the Sleepy Mythologist. Tonight we're travelling far back in time, to ancient Greece, where the stars watched over a world filled with gods, monsters and heroes. Our story tonight is about Hercules, the son of Zeus, a man so strong and yet so burdened that he was forced to complete 12 impossible labours, each one more dangerous than the last. But before we begin, take a moment to relax, breathe in gently and let it go slowly. As you get comfortable, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Are you somewhere by the sea, in the quiet of the mountains, or maybe lying peacefully in bed under the soft glow of the moon? Wherever you are, I'm so glad you're here. Now, close your eyes if you haven't already, and let the story carry you away. Long ago, in the golden age of myth, when God still walked among men and the stars told stories to those who looked up at night, there lived a boy named Hercules. Though many today know him as Hercules. He was no ordinary child. His father was Zeus, the king of the gods, ruler of the sky and thunder. His mother, a mortal woman named Alcmene, was kind and noble, but very human. From the moment Hercules took his first breath, he was marked by destiny. He had the strength of a god, but the burdens of a man. And in the heavens above, Hera, the wife of Zeus, watched with quiet fury. She had not forgotten the betrayal of her husband, who had once again fathered a child outside of their divine marriage. And though Hercules was innocent, Hera's jealousy burned like an eternal flame. So she waited, not with thunder or vengeance, but with patience, because sometimes the cruelest punishments are the ones that take time. Hercules grew into a man of impossible strength. He could slay lions, uproot trees, and run faster than wild horses. He was admired by kings and warriors alike. Songs were sung in his name, and temples were built to honour him. He married a beautiful woman named Megara, and together they had children who laughed and danced and brought him great joy. But Hera had not forgotten him. One day when the sky was cloudless and all seemed peaceful, Hera struck, not with lightning, not with fire, but with madness. A mist crept over Hercules' mind, soft at first, like a forgotten dream. He saw shadows where there were none. He heard whispers that didn't belong to this world. Slowly the mist grew darker. The world twisted. Reality became a cruel illusion. And in that terrible haze, he no longer saw his wife or his children. Only enemies, only threats. The tragedy that followed is one too heavy to tell quickly. In his madness, Hercules did something no father, no husband, no human soul would ever wish to do. And when the fog finally lifted, when Hera let go of her grip, Hercules stood in the ruins of his own life. His wife was gone, his children too, and the silence of that empty home rang louder than any battle ever could. He fell to his knees. Even the mighty Hercules, stronger than any mortal alive, was not strong enough to carry the weight of that sorrow. He wandered the earth in grief, seeking answers, seeking forgiveness, though no one could grant it. No one but the oracle of Delphi, the voice of Apollo, who spoke on behalf of the gods. Her eyes saw what others could not. When Hercules arrived at her temple, broken and trembling, she did not greet him with judgment. She only whispered what the gods had decided. "If you wish to cleanse your soul," she said, "you must serve your cousin, King Eurystheus of Tiryns. You will complete 10 labours for him, and through these impossible tasks, you will earn redemption." Hercules did not argue. He did not ask why, he simply bowed his head and walked into his fate. But what he didn't know then was that 10 would not be enough. Hera would see to that. She would make sure his punishment was longer, harder, deeper. And so began the story of the 12 labours, born not out of glory but out of pain, not out of pride but of penance, each one a step on a long, lonely road toward healing, and perhaps in time peace. And that is how it all began. The first labour would take Hercules into the wild places of the world, far from the safety of cities, and deep into the forgotten woods where legends still breathed. He was sent to the land of Nemea, a place of silence and shadow. The people of Nemea lived in fear, hiding behind closed doors, whispering of a beast that could not be killed. It stalked the hills and valleys, silent as mist, swift as thunder. The Nemean lion. No spear could pierce its golden fur, no arrow could pass through its hide. Warriors who faced it were never seen again. Only the wind returned, carrying their screams through the trees, The lion's lair lay in a cave, nestled in the side of a mountain, its entrance draped in hanging vines and half swallowed by stone. Few had seen the beast and lived to tell of it, but they all agreed on one thing: its eyes did not blink, and its roar made the earth tremble. When Hercules arrived, he did not bring an army. He did not bring chariots or fire. He carried only his bow, his club, and the strength that lived in his blood and bone. As he entered the hills, the air grew colder, the birds grew silent, and the trees stood motionless, as if they too feared to draw attention. Every step Hercules took seemed to echo louder than it should, as though the very earth was warning him. Turn back, but he did not. He followed the lion's trail, footprints larger than any man's pressed deep into the soft earth. He found bones along the way, shattered skulls, cracked ribs, torn armour. The lion did not eat for hunger, it seemed. It killed to defend its silence. Then, as the sun dipped low, turning the sky the colour of fire, Hercules heard it. The roar. It rolled over the hills like a wave, shaking the leaves from the trees, scattering flocks of birds into the air. It was not the sound of an animal, it was the voice of something ancient, a creature born from chaos itself. Hercules didn't run, he only walked toward the sound. Soon he saw it, perched on a ridge, backlit by the dying light of the day. Its fur shimmered like molten gold, its muscles moved like coiled steel beneath its skin, its eyes locked onto Hercules, and in that moment the forest held its breath. Hercules raised his bow. He aimed carefully, steadily, then released. The arrow flew straight and fast and bounced off the lion's hide like a feather on stone. He fired another, and another. Each one fell to the ground, broken or bent. The lion did not flee. It charged. The earth thundered under its paws as it leapt at Hercules, teeth bared, claws flashing like blades. Hercules rolled to the side, grabbing his great club. With a roar of his own, he struck the beast across the skull. The club shattered. Splinters flew in every direction. The lion paused, stunned for a moment. Then it lunged again. This was no battle of weapons, it was a battle of strength, of will. Hercules threw aside the remains of his club. He would fight this creature as it demanded, bare-handed, man against monster, flesh against fury. They clashed beneath the trees, rolling through the dirt and leaves, a blur of golden fur and scarred skin. The lion slashed at his arms, tearing his skin. Blood stained the ground. But Hercules held on. He wrestled the beast to the earth, grappling for its throat. The lion thrashed, bit, clawed. But Hercules did not let go. He found its neck thick as a tree trunk, and with a strength no mortal could match, he squeezed. Not with anger, not with hatred, but with quiet resolve. The lion let out a final echoing cry, and then lay still. The forest remained silent. The wind returned. The birds slowly began to sing again. Hercules stood over the body of the beast, panting, bloodied, but unbroken. He had done what no one thought possible. But there was still one problem. Its hide, impenetrable even in death, could not be pierced. No knife could cut it. No fire could burn it. And so Hercules did what only someone as clever as he was strong would think to do. He used the lion's own claws to skin it. The sharp, curved talons, harder than iron, sliced through the hide with ease. He took the pelt and wore it as a cloak. Its head became his hood, its golden fur his armour. From that day forward, Hercules walked with the skin of the Nemean lion draped across his shoulders, silent proof of his strength, and a warning to all who saw him. This was a man who had faced the impossible, and won. But it was only the beginning. One labour down, 11 more to go. The second labour would test not only Hercules' strength, but his patience, his courage, and his ability to face what others could not even look upon without trembling. This time his path led him to the swampy lands near the ancient city of Lerna. It was a strange and haunting place, where thick fog rolled endlessly across the water, and the air hung heavy with the scent of decay. The trees grew crooked here, twisted like old hands reaching toward the sky. Birds did not sing in the marshlands of Lerna. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Why? Because something terrible lived there, something that did not sleep, or hunger, or age, a creature as old as the first nightmares. They called it the Hydra, a serpent so massive that its very breath could poison the air. Its blood, it was said, was acid that could melt through metal. Its body was long and coiled, black as midnight, with thick, scaled skin that glistened like wet stone. But its most fearsome trait was this: it had many heads. Some said 5, others said 9. A few whispered that it had even more than that. But the truth was darker still. Every time one head was cut off, 2 more would grow in its place. No one had ever defeated it. No one had even come close. But Hercules had been sent to do what no one else could. He did not turn back, even as his boots sank into the muddy earth, even as the mist wrapped around him like ghostly fingers. He walked deeper into the marsh until the ground gave way to water, and the water to shadow. And then he heard it. Not a roar, not a hiss, but something stranger, the low rumbling sound of many voices breathing at once, and it was deep, rhythmic, hypnotic, like the heartbeat of something ancient awakening from sleep. He stepped onto a rock, and another, until he found solid ground. And then he saw them. Eyes. Dozens of glowing eyes, blinking slowly in the fog. The Hydra had sensed him. Without warning, it rose from the water, its long necks twisting and swaying, heads snapping and snarling. One hissed like a kettle, another let out a deep growl that shook the reeds around them. Drool fell from its jagged mouths, burning holes in the earth where it landed. Hercules did not hesitate. He swung his sword with fury, slicing off one of the heads. For a moment there was silence. Then 2 more sprouted from the bleeding stump, faster than weeds in spring. They twisted upward, snapping at him with renewed hunger. Hercules realized the truth. If he continued like this, he would only make the monster stronger. Every head he cut only doubled his problem. Still, he fought on, dodging, ducking, striking with precision. He danced between snapping jaws, rolled beneath swinging necks, stabbed and punched and kicked. But the beast only grew more furious. More heads, more eyes, more death. The air thickened with venom. The swamp began to boil. And then Hercules remembered something. Before he had set out on this labour, he had brought someone with him, a companion, his nephew Iolaus, clever young man who had followed him into the marsh, staying just out of sight. Hercules called out to him now, "Iolaus, fire!" Iolaus, who had been waiting on the edge of the swamp, rushed forward with a torch, its flame dancing brightly in the fog. He set to work behind Hercules, following close. Each time Hercules cut off a head, Iolaus pressed the torch to the stump, cauterizing the wound, searing it shut before new heads could grow. The air filled with the scent of burning flesh and bitter smoke. The Hydra shrieked in agony, writhing in pain, lashing out wildly. But now the battle had changed. Together the 2 worked in perfect rhythm, steel and fire, sword and flame. Hercules cut, Iolaus burned. One by one the heads were destroyed. Finally, only the central head remained, the one that could not be cut, not with any sword. This was the true heart of the Hydra, and Hercules knew he needed something stronger than steel. With all his strength he lifted a massive boulder from the swamp floor. Muscles trembling, he brought it down on the Hydra's skull, crushing the final head beneath its weight. The monster let out one last sound, a long, sighing breath of Ierto, like a wind that had been trapped in a cave for 1,000 years. Then all was still. The swamp fell silent once more. The mist began to clear, and the poisonous breath that had once choked the land slowly faded into the air. But Hercules was not finished. He knew the Hydra's blood was deadly, so deadly that even a single drop could kill. He dipped his arrows in the creature's blood, turning them into weapons so fearsome that no shield could defend against them. These poisoned arrows would one day bring down monsters and kings. As he left the swamp, the light of day began to return, painting the water in soft gold. Hercules had faced the Hydra, not just a beast of flesh and bone, but a creature born of fear and myth, and he had emerged victorious. But the memory of the many-headed serpent would never leave him. It would follow him through every labour, through every dark dream, and though the Hydra was gone, its lesson would remain. Some problems cannot be solved by strength alone. Sometimes you must think, sometimes you must burn the roots, not just cut the branches, and so the second labour came to an end. But many more still lay ahead. After the brutal confrontation with the Hydra, one might imagine that Hercules would be given rest, time to let his wounds heal, to allow his mind to quiet after facing a monster born of nightmare. But no such rest would come. His labours were not meant to be easy. They were meant to test the very core of who he was. And the next task would be no less difficult, though not because it required brute strength, but because it demanded something far more elusive: patience. Hercules was sent northward this time, toward the distant lands of Arcadia. There, nestled among emerald hills and sun-drenched meadows, roamed a creature unlike any other, a golden-horned deer, sacred to the goddess Artemis herself. This was the Ceryneian hind. She was no ordinary deer. Her hooves were said to be swifter than the wind. Her body glimmered like polished bronze, and her antlers shone with the light of the rising sun. For years, no mortal had been able to lay eyes on her for more than a moment. So quickly did she disappear into the trees, vanishing like a spirit into the morning mist. But this was no hunt. This was not a creature to be killed or harmed. For to lay a finger upon one of Artemis's sacred animals was to bring down the wrath of the goddess, a wrath even the mighty Hercules dared not awaken. The challenge then was this: he had to capture the hind, not wound it, not trap it with force. He had to outsmart it, outlast it, move like the forest itself. And so Hercules began his journey into the wooded hills of Arcadia. For days he walked beneath towering pines and ancient oaks, his footsteps silent, his eyes always scanning the forest. He slept little. He ate only what the woods provided, and each morning, just at the edge of his vision, he would catch a flicker of gold among the trees, a flash of movement, the sound of hooves against stone. The hind was watching him, just as he was watching her. She was not afraid. She was curious, but she was also clever. Sometimes she would step into a clearing just long enough for him to spot her, before disappearing into the brush like a falling star. Other times she would leave her tracks in the mud, deep enough for him to follow, but never close enough to catch. One day turned into three into a week into a month. Through the mountains he climbed, across rivers he waded, over frozen ridges he marched. His muscles ached, his feet bled, but still he followed, and still she stayed just ahead. There were moments when he thought he had lost her entirely, when the tracks vanished, when the silence of the forest became too thick. But then he would find a mark, a broken branch, a gleaming hair caught on a thorn bush. She was leading him, not fleeing, but guiding. And slowly something within Hercules began to shift. This was not a chase, it was a lesson. He began to move differently, quieter, softer. He started to feel the rhythm of the land, the way the sun warmed certain hills in the morning, the way the wind shifted before rain. He began to sense the hind not with his eyes, but with his spirit. On the final day, months after he'd begun, he came upon a small spring hidden in a grove of willows. The water sparkled in the moonlight, and there, drinking from its edge, was the hind. She did not run. She turned her head and looked at him with eyes as deep and calm as the sea. Hercules stepped forward slowly, kneeling beside the spring. He did not draw his weapon. He did not reach out with force. He simply waited. For a long time they remained there, man and beast, sharing the silence of the grove. Then, with a breath so soft it could have been a prayer, he moved. Gently, carefully. He slipped a loop of soft rope around her neck, and she allowed it. Not because he had overpowered her, but because he had earned it. The journey back to Mycenae was slow. He would not force her to move quickly. He treated her not as a prisoner, but as a guest, pausing often to let her rest, whispering soft words to calm her, feeding her from his hand. When he finally arrived, King Eurystheus was waiting, eager to claim the deer as proof of Hercules' success. But before he could touch her, a divine presence filled the air. The woods seemed to bend, and a soft light filtered through the clouds. It was Artemis. She had come for her hind. Her eyes met Hercules. For a moment the forest held its breath again. But she did not punish him. She saw what had happened. She saw that Hercules had respected the creature, had shown restraint and reverence. She took the hind gently, releasing it back into the woods, and with a quiet nod she vanished. The labour was done, but Hercules had gained more than a victory. He had learned to move with the world, not against it. He had learned that not every battle is won with fists, and not every triumph requires blood. Sometimes the greatest strength is stillness. The fifth labour sent Hercules into the heart of the mountains, where the land grew cold and sharp and the air carried the bitter scent of snow and pine. It was here in the dark reaches of Mount Erymanthus that the next great challenge awaited, a monstrous boar so fierce and relentless that even the bravest hunters refused to speak its name at night. This was no ordinary animal. The Erymanthian boar was said to be larger than any bull, with tusks like swords and a hide so thick that arrows bounced off it like pebbles. It did not kill for hunger, but for the sheer rage of being disturbed. It lived alone deep in the frozen wilderness, coming down only in winter to terrorize villages, destroy fields and rip through herds of livestock as if they were made of straw. The people who lived in its shadow had long since given up hope. They whispered of it in frightened voices, and every year, when the snow began to fall, they braced for its return. And now, Hercules was to face it. He set off through the highlands with only his lion skin for warmth and a spear slung across his back. The journey to the mountain was harsh and slow. The wind howled like a living thing, clawing at his face and filling his ears with the cries of unseen spirits. Snow crunched underfoot, sometimes swallowing his boots, sometimes hiding deep ravines just beneath the surface. For days he wandered through ice and stone, following the faint signs of the boar, shattered trees, gouged earth, hoof prints pressed deep into the frozen ground. Each night he camped in silence beneath the stars, the cold pressing against his bones, but never breaking his resolve. On the fourth day he came upon the ruins of a shepherd's hut, its walls smashed, its roof caved in, blood stained the snow nearby, and there, among the broken wood, he found it, a single bristle, thick as rope, sharp as a needle. The boar was close. He pressed on, higher and higher into the very spine of the mountain. The trees thinned, the sky grew darker even by day, and then, without warning, he heard it. A deep guttural roar, not quite the sound of any pig or beast, but something worse. It was the sound of fury, of something wild and unchained. He turned a bend in the icy trail and saw it. The boar. It was massive, its body a slab of muscle covered in coarse spiked fur, its eyes burned red with anger, and its tusks curved outward in gleaming arcs of bone. Its breath steamed in the air, rising in angry clouds, and its hooves cracked the ice beneath it with every step. It saw Hercules and charged. The mountain shook. Hercules held his ground, waiting until the last moment. Then he dodged to the side, the boar missing him by a hair's width, crashing into a tree and splintering it into 1,000 shards. Hercules turned, his spear ready, but he didn't throw it. Not yet. He had been warned that the beast's hide was like armour. A careless strike would only enrage it further. This would not be a battle of brute force, it would be a test of endurance. So he began to run. He led the boar up the mountainside, weaving between boulders, leaping over icy streams, always just ahead of its deadly charge. The boar followed, shrieking, frothing, tearing the earth with its tusks. It was wild with fury, and it would not stop. But Hercules had a plan. He knew the mountain. He had studied its cliffs and ridges, learned where the ice grew thin and where the snow ran deep. He led the boar to a narrow pass where the wind screamed like a banshee, and the ground sloped sharply down into a frozen ravine. There he stopped. He turned to face the creature, planting his feet, bracing his spear. The boar charged one final time. Hercules waited, calm as stone, then stepped aside and struck. The spear dug into the creature's side, not deep enough to kill, but deep enough to unbalance it. The boar stumbled, roared, and slid. Its hooves lost grip, and it tumbled, crashing down into the ravine, snow exploding around it as it vanished into the white. But Hercules did not cheer. He climbed down slowly, carefully, into the frozen hollow below. There the beast lay stunned, trapped in a drift of deep snow, struggling to rise but unable to move. Hercules approached with caution. He bound the creature with thick chains, tying its legs and muzzle, whispering to it, not in anger, but with a strange kind of respect. This was no ordinary enemy. This was nature, raw and ancient, and Hercules honoured it. With great effort, he dragged the boar down the mountain, step by heavy step, through storm and wind, through snow and shadow. When he arrived at the palace of King Eurystheus, the king took one look at the beast, snorting, snarling, foam dripping from its jaws, and ran in terror, diving into a large bronze jar to hide. Hercules said nothing. He had faced the fury of the mountains. He had endured the cold and the storm, and he had brought back not a trophy, but a living symbol of his resolve. Strength was not always in the sword. Sometimes it was in the will to climb higher, run longer, and face the storm without turning away. And so the fifth labour was complete, but Hercules knew the mountain inside him was only beginning to rise. After subduing the savage boar, Hercules might have thought his next labour would bring him some form of relief, something less violent, or perhaps even simple. But the gods rarely grant such mercy, especially when Hera is watching from the heavens with a cold and calculating eye. For his sixth task, King Eurystheus gave him an order that seemed more humiliation than heroism. Hercules was to clean the Augean stables. At first it sounded like a joke. The stables belonged to King Augeas, a wealthy ruler of Elia who owned the largest herds of cattle in all of Greece. Thousands upon thousands of oxen, bulls, goats and sheep had been kept in those stables for years, many say over 30, without ever being cleaned. No one dared attempt it. The stench was unimaginable. The filth had piled high, solid as rock. Rivers of waste flowed from the buildings, turning nearby fields into marshes of decay. Even the gods turned their faces away from it. To clean the Augean stables in a single day was not only thought to be impossible, it was insulting. It was a labour meant to disgrace Hercules, to make him bend not in battle, but in filth. But Hercules did not flinch. When he arrived at Elis, the people laughed. Some whispered behind his back, "The mighty lion slayer, now a dung shoveler," they scoffed. But Hercules said nothing. He walked straight to King Augeas and made a bold offer. He would clean all the stables in one day, but he wanted something in return. If he succeeded, Augeas would grant him 1/10 of his vast herds. The king, thinking the task impossible, agreed, and even called in his son Philaelus as a witness. With that, Hercules turned and surveyed the towering walls of waste. The smell was thick in the air, heavy and foul, choking the wind itself. The buildings groaned under the weight of rot. No tools or shovels could help him here. Not even his great strength could remove the mountains of filth fast enough. But Hercules did not rely on strength alone. He relied on wisdom. He noticed two mighty rivers not far from the stables, the Alpheus and the Peneus, flowing with pure rushing water. And in that moment, inspiration struck like lightning. Instead of fighting the mountain of filth with brute force, he would use the power of nature itself. He walked upstream and, using his immense strength, began to dig. He carved a channel from the Alpheus River, redirecting its flow toward the stables. Then he did the same with the Peneus, creating a second path. Water surged into the stable grounds like a great beast awakening from slumber. It crashed through the stalls and troughs, churning up the years of filth, washing away decay that had turned to stone. The rivers swept it all away, into the fields beyond, then back out toward the sea. By sundown the air was clear. The stables gleamed like new. Not only had Hercules completed the task, he had done it without lifting a single shovel. He had turned a symbol of shame into a triumph of cleverness. But when King Augeas learned of the feat, he was furious. He refused to pay Hercules the promised reward, claiming that the labour had been done in service to Eurystheus, not as a private agreement. Worse, he banished both Hercules and his own son Phyleus, who had dared to speak the truth and defend the hero. Hercules did not argue. He simply turned away, his heart heavy but his head high. He had completed the task. The gods had seen it. The rivers had carried the proof. Years later, Hercules would return to Elis to right the wrong, but for now he continued on his path. And though others still whispered about the labour, calling it lowly, he knew better. There is no shame in dirt. There is no disgrace in work. He had bent the forces of the earth to his will, and through water, not war, he had triumphed. Sometimes the greatest strength is not in the sword or the fist, but in the mind, in the willingness to see the world differently, to move rivers, to wash away what others leave to rot. And so the sixth labour came to an end, not with bloodshed, not with battle cries, but with the quiet power of flowing water. And as the sun set over the shining stables, even the gods, far above in their golden halls, were said to smile, just a little. With 6 labours behind him, Hercules had faced monstrous strength, relentless fury, and the filth of neglect. But the 7th task would ask something stranger of him, something eerie, elusive, and sharp as wind. It would take him not into the mountains or swamps, but to the skies above a dark, forgotten forest, where death came not on 4 legs, but on wings. The Stymphalian marsh was a place untouched by time. Nestled between steep cliffs and dense woods, It was known less for its beauty and more for the feeling it gave to travellers. A chill down the spine, a sense of being watched. Even the bravest of hunters refused to enter its shadowed groves. Not because of what they could see, but because of what they couldn't. The danger that lurked there was not of flesh and bone alone. It was a flock. A flock of birds, yes, but not the kind that brought song and spring. These were the Stymphalian birds, creatures said to be born from the union of metal and malice. Their feathers were sharp as daggers, forged in fire. Their beaks could pierce armour and their eyes gleamed like cold coins. They were sacred to Ares, the god of war, and filled with the bloodlust of battle. Their wings did not hum, they shrieked, and their cries pierced the air like arrows. These birds fed on human flesh. Their droppings poisoned the soil. Their numbers were so great that they blotted out the sun when they took flight. No one dared approach them, until Hercules arrived. When he first stood at the edge of the marsh, the air was still. The trees were motionless. The sky was an empty grey. But the silence was not peaceful. It was thick, like a held breath. He stepped forward, and immediately the stillness shattered. Dozens, then hundreds, of birds rose into the sky, shrieking, spinning, circling above his head. Their wings siced the air. Feathers shot toward him like knives, embedding themselves into tree trunks, whistling past his skin. He raised his shield and took cover beneath a rocky outcrop, narrowly avoiding a volley of razor-like quills. Hercules realized that he couldn't fight them the way he had fought lions or boars. These were not beasts to wrestle or pin down. They were fast, distant, ever-moving. Striking one or two would make no difference. He needed to draw them out, flush them from their nests. But how do you battle the wind? He sat and waited for nightfall. The marsh grew darker, colder. Mist began to rise from the still waters. The birds, one by one, returned to their perches, watching him with silent, unblinking eyes. That night, Hercules remembered a gift given to him long ago by the goddess Athena, a pair of bronze crotala or clappers, forged by the god Hephaestus himself. They looked like simple instruments, two cymbal-like discs tied to leather cords, but they were anything but ordinary. He rose before dawn and climbed to a ridge overlooking the marsh. The birds still slept, their wings folded tight, hidden among the trees and reeds. Then Hercules struck the crotala together. A sound burst forth, loud, unnatural, echoing like 1,000 swords drawn at once. It rang through the marsh, bounced off the cliffs, reverberated through the trees. It was not a sound of music, it was a sound of terror. The birds shrieked and panicked. They flew up all at once in a flurry of motion, thousands of blades on wings. Their formation broke. Their precision failed. Confused, they scattered in all directions. This was his moment. Hercules took up his bow, the same bow whose arrows he had dipped in the poisonous blood of the Hydra. With each shot he brought one bird down, then another, and another. Every poisoned arrow found its mark. The sharp cries of the birds filled the air, then faded one by one into the silence of the marsh. He moved quickly, without hesitation, eyes sharp as a hawk's. He did not try to kill them all, only enough to drive the rest away. He knew that to destroy them completely would take years, but with the crotala in one hand and his bow in the other, he shattered their dominance over the land. The survivors, disoriented and fearful, fled across the sea, never to return, and suddenly the air in the marsh changed. The silence remained, but now it was peaceful. The trees seemed to sigh with relief. Light filtered through the branches, no longer blocked by black wings. The water, once poisoned, began to reflect the sky again. The people of the nearby villages emerged from hiding, cautious at first. But when they saw the glint of feathers on the ground, broken, lifeless, dull, they knew the curse had lifted. Hercules stood at the edge of the marsh, watching the morning sunrise. His arms ached from the battle, feathers stuck to his lion cloak, and his quiver was nearly empty. But he was calm. This labour had not been one of muscle alone. It had required cunning, tools, timing. It had asked him to fight enemies he could not touch, to outwit, not overward. And it had shown him once again that strength is more than might. It is adaptation, awareness, the ability to see the shape of the challenge even when it changes, and to meet it with whatever means the gods have placed in your hands. So the seventh labour was completed. And as the marsh slowly returned to life, Hercules walked away, through the forest, under a quiet sky, leaving behind only broken feathers and a legend that would whisper through the trees for centuries to come. Hercules had battled monsters, tamed storms, and even outwitted the silence of birds whose wings were sharper than blades. But his eighth labour would take him far from the familiar hills and forests of Greece. This time his path led across the sea to the windswept island of Crete, an ancient land of towering palaces, labyrinthine caves, and gods whose presence was felt in every stone. Crete was ruled by King Minos, a proud and powerful monarch whose name echoed across the Aegean. He was the son of Zeus himself, and he ruled with the belief that the gods had chosen him above all others. His throne was carved from ivory, his people feared and revered him, and yet, in his pride, he had brought upon himself a curse. Years before, Minos had made a promise to Poseidon, god of the sea. He had prayed for a sign that would prove his divine right to rule, and Poseidon, rising from the waves, had answered. From the ocean, the god sent a magnificent bull, pure white, shimmering in the sun, more beautiful than any creature the island had ever seen. The agreement was simple. Minos would sacrifice the bull in Poseidon's honour. But when the king saw the animal, he changed his mind. He could not bring himself to kill it. It was too perfect, too regal. He sacrificed another bull instead, thinking Poseidon would not notice. But the gods are not so easily deceived. As punishment, Poseidon cursed the bull. What was once noble and serene became wild and uncontrollable. The creature's eyes burned with fury, and its muscles rippled with divine rage. It trampled fields, destroyed altars, and terrified the people of Crete. It could not be reasoned with. No rope could hold it. No fence could contain it. And so the people cried out, and the king, too proud to admit his mistake, summoned help. That help came in the form of Hercules. When the hero arrived on the shores of Crete, the island was quiet, not in peace but in dread. The bull had fled to the mountains, wandering the high cliffs and valleys like a spirit of vengeance. Villagers spoke of seeing it silhouetted against the moon, its breath steaming in the night air, its hooves striking sparks from the stone. Hercules climbed those mountains, following faint trails of crushed grass and broken branches. He moved carefully, not because he feared the beast, but because he respected it. This was no mindless monster. This was an animal once touched by divinity, now driven mad by betrayal. After 2 days of searching, he found the bull in a wide valley at dusk. The sky was painted with crimson clouds. The bull stood in the centre of the field, snorting, pawing the earth. It was enormous, taller than a man at the shoulder, its white coat stained with dust and sweat. Its horns were long, curved like scythes, gleaming in the dying light. Hercules stepped into the field. The bull turned to face him, and for a long moment, neither moved. The wind whispered through the grass. The earth felt still. Then the bull charged. It came like a thunderbolt, hooves pounding, horns aimed for the kill, but Hercules did not flinch. He sidestepped at the last second, grabbing the bull by the horns and twisting with all his might. The creature bucked and reared, thrashing like a storm, dragging Hercules across the field. But he held on. His feet dug furrows in the earth. His muscles strained, not in rage, but in relentless calm. He did not strike. He did not shout. He simply endured. He wrestled the beast not as an enemy, but as a force of nature. It kicked. It twisted. It tried to gore him, but he moved with it, learned its rhythm, let its energy exhaust itself. At last, the bull began to slow. Its breath came in ragged bursts. Its legs trembled. Hercules loosened his grip, but only slightly. He leaned close and whispered something no one else could hear. It may have been a prayer, or maybe a promise. Slowly the bull lowered its head, and Hercules, with ropes and calm hands, bound it. The journey back to Knossos, the great capital of Crete, was long and careful. Hercules did not drag the bull. He walked beside it. The people watched in awe, lining the roads as man and beast passed side by side like two old warriors who had come to understand each other. When he reached the palace of King Minos, the ruler came out to see what he had not dared to face himself. And there it was, his broken promise made flesh. The bull, still powerful, still majestic, but calm, waiting, watching. Minos said nothing. Perhaps he was ashamed. Perhaps he knew that no punishment from the gods could equal the regret of his own pride. Hercules turned and left without a word. As for the bull, it would later be released, free to roam once more. Some say it crossed the sea to the mainland, where it would become the father of another myth, another curse. But in that moment, on the island of kings and gods, Hercules had done more than tame a beast. He had faced the wrath of a betrayed god. He had wrestled the weight of a broken promise, and he had prevailed, not through destruction, but through understanding. For even the wildest creature, when treated with respect, may remember what it once was. And so the eighth labour came to an end, not in blood, not in glory, but in the quiet bond between strength and mercy. And the island, for the first time in many years, slept peacefully under the stars. The ninth labour of Hercules would lead him into a land where savagery wore the mask of civilization, a kingdom ruled by a man who had twisted power into cruelty, and whose prized possessions were not treasures of gold or jewels, but monsters made by his own hand. There, in the shadowy realm of Thrace, lived King Diomedes, son of Ares, god of war, and just like his father, Diomedes ruled not through wisdom or justice, but through fear and blood. He was tall and cruel, with a heart as hard as iron. His kingdom was built not on peace, but on violence. But it was not Diomedes himself who inspired the most terror. It was what he kept in his royal stables. Horses, but not the kind you ride. These were no noble steeds, no companions of charioteers or symbols of freedom. The mares of Diomedes were monstrous, wild-eyed creatures, with manes like flame and hooves that struck sparks against the stone. Their breath was hot and steaming, and their eyes glowed with a dull red light. But it was their hunger that made them truly horrifying. They fed not on grass or oats. They fed on human flesh, captives, enemies, even the king's own subjects when they displeased him. These were the horses Hercules was ordered to steal. He was to take them from the stables, tame them, and bring them back across the dangerous land of Thrace. At first, this seemed like a task of brute force, another trial of strength, but soon Hercules would discover it was something far more complex, for in Thrace, violence was not just a tool, it was the law of the land. And the horses were not just animals, they were mirrors reflecting the savagery of the man who owned them. Hercules travelled north, alone. The roads were cold and windswept. He passed villages where people lived in silence, never lifting their heads. Fields were empty, forests had been stripped, even the birds seemed afraid to sing. Thrace was a place where joy had long since fled. When he arrived at Diomedes' palace, he was met not with welcome, but with scorn. The guards sneered. They knew who he was, but they believed no man could take the mares, not even the lion slayer of legend. The stables stood on a high hill overlooking the sea. The structure was made of black stone, reinforced with chains and iron gates. The smell hit him first, thick, metallic, a blend of salt and rot. Then came the sound, the heavy snorting of beasts barely restrained, the pounding of hooves against the stone floor. Hercules approached with caution. When the doors opened, the mares charged forward, their teeth snapping, rope straining, foam dripping from their jaws. They reared and kicked, mad with hunger, eyes wild with a fury that came not from nature, but from what they had been turned into. He tried to calm them, but they would not listen, not to words, not to hands. They bit at him, tried to trample him, their hooves flashing like hammers. And then he understood. These animals had never known kindness, never known a gentle touch. They had been fed cruelty, and so they had become cruel. Hercules realized that if he wanted to tame them, he would have to strike at the source of their madness. Diomedes. So Hercules left the stables and marched straight into the palace, past the guards, through the marble halls, and into the throne room where the king sat with his bloody wine and war-scarred hands. Diomedes laughed when he saw him. "You've come for the mares," he sneered. "Then you'll feed them first." He rose to his feet and drew his sword. The duel was swift and brutal. Diomedes was a skilled fighter trained by his father Ares, and his blows were precise and cruel, but Hercules was a storm. With every strike he grew stronger, like a fire fanned by the wind. Their swords clashed like thunder in the cold hall, and finally Hercules threw Diomedes to the ground. But he did not kill him, not yet. He dragged the king back to the stables, and there he threw open the gates. The mares smelled him, and for the first time Diomedes saw what he had created. They did not pause, they lunged. What followed was a terrible moment, but a necessary one. The mares tore into their master not because they were evil, but because they had been shaped by his evil, and in the absence of his control their madness turned on him. When it was over, the air was still. The horses stepped back, their eyes dimmed, their heads bowed. The hunger that had driven them was gone. It was as though something inside them had broken free, something dark, something unnatural, and in its place silence. Hercules stepped forward carefully. He touched one of the mares gently on the side of her neck. She did not flinch. He whispered to her, and she listened. Together the horses followed him out of the stables, down the hill, and across the dark roads of Thrace, where once they had brought only death, now they walked in quiet obedience. When Hercules returned to King Eurystheus with the mares, the sight stunned all who saw them. These were not the bloodthirsty beasts of myth. These were calm, quiet creatures, walking behind the hero like shadows. The king, terrified by what he had heard, ordered the horses to be released into the wild, and so they ran into the hills and mountains, free at last. The 9th labour was complete, but it had not been won through strength alone. It had been won through understanding, for Hercules had seen something that others could not, that even monsters are made, not born, that even the most vicious creature may be healed when the hand that hurt them is removed. And so he walked away once more, not just as a warrior, but as something more rare, a man who had touched the heart of a beast, and found something human there. By the time Hercules was sent on his 10th labour, he had faced beasts and storms, madness and silence, kings and curses. He had crossed mountains, rivers, islands, and deserts. His skin bore the marks of battle, but his spirit was something else entirely, tempered, sharpened, quiet. Yet this next task would require him to navigate not just danger, but diplomacy, one of the rare labours where the enemy would smile first, offer hospitality, and speak in riddles. He was sent to the distant lands of the Amazons, a realm ruled not by kings but by warrior queens. His goal? To retrieve the belt of Hippolyta, a gift of Ares, the god of war, worn only by the queen herself. This belt was no ordinary ornament. It symbolized her power, her right to rule, and her bond with the divine. It had never been removed. Not for any man, not for any war, and now Hercules had to take it. No one thought he would succeed, not because the Amazons were cruel, but because they were proud, fierce, independent. They lived apart from the world of men, not in fear but by choice. Legend spoke of their unmatched skill in battle, their precision with the bow, their speed on horseback. They were said to be descended from Ares himself, and they had built a society where every girl was raised to be strong, clever, and free. Hercules journeyed across the Aegean and through the dark waters of the Black Sea. His ship was small, his crew quiet. They had heard stories, tales of warriors who vanished in those wild lands, of arrows that flew from nowhere, of camps that disappeared into the trees like ghosts. When they arrived at the shores of Themyscira, the land of the Amazons, there was no army waiting to attack. Only the wind, the river, the tall grass swaying like silent dancers. The queen herself, Hippolyta, came to meet them. She rode alone, no armour, no sword in hand, only the gleaming belt around her waist, glowing faintly in the sun. Her presence was calm, her face unreadable. She looked at Hercules not with fear or anger, but with curiosity. "You've come for my belt," she said. Hercules bowed. He did not draw his weapon. "I have," he replied, "but not for myself. It is a task given to me." Hippolyta studied him for a long moment. Her eyes saw deeper than most. She had known many warriors, and many more men who claimed to be heroes, but this one was different. To everyone's surprise, she invited him into her camp. And so Hercules entered the world of the Amazons, not as an invader, but as a guest. He walked through their city built among trees and rivers, watched them train, heard them laugh. These were not savages. They were scholars and riders, hunters and musicians. Their culture was strong and ancient, steeped in stories that had never crossed the sea. Each night he sat with Hippolyta by the fire, and they spoke. They spoke of war and peace, of gods and kings, of strength and when to use it. And slowly something unexpected began to form between them. Respect. She saw in Hercules a man who did not seek domination, who did not mock what he could not understand, and he saw in her a queen who led with grace, who did not fear the weight of power. It is said that after several days Hippolyta told him quietly that she would give him the belt. Not because she was afraid, not because she was defeated, but because he had earned it, not with violence, but with humility. But just as the sun rose on what might have been a peaceful ending, the gods intervened. Hera had been watching. She could not stand to see Hercules succeed through kindness. She could not bear to see an alliance form between the hero and the Amazon queen. So she whispered a lie among the Amazon ranks. She spread rumours that Hercules had come not in peace, but in deceit, that he planned to kidnap the queen, to take their ruler and humiliate their people. The whispers grew into fear. The fear turned to fury, and soon the Amazons took up arms. Their camp transformed into a battlefield. Arrows darkened the sky. Horses screamed. Fires leapt from tent to tent. The harmony of the past few days was shattered in moments. Hercules tried to explain, to stop the bloodshed, but it was too late. He and his men were forced to fight for their lives. In the chaos, Hercules was confronted by Hippolyta herself. Her eyes were no longer calm, they were filled with pain. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you betray me?" And he could only shake his head, shouting through the clash of steel, "I didn't!" But she did not believe him. Not because she wanted to, but because fear makes fools of even the wisest. They fought, not with hatred, but with heartbreak. The battle was fierce. Hippolyta was swift, her strikes as graceful as they were deadly. Hercules did not wish to harm her, but he could not allow himself to die. He blocked, dodged, parried, holding back as best he could. And then, the fatal moment. Another warrior rushed in, spear in hand, aimed not at Hercules but at one of his men. Hercules reacted, spun, struck. The blow hit Hippolyta, not by choice, not by anger, but it struck true. She fell. The battlefield fell quiet. The belt gleamed at her side. Hercules dropped to his knees beside her, his hand stained with her blood, his breath shallow. Her eyes, still watching, held no blame, only sadness. She reached up and gave him the belt, not in defeat, but in forgiveness. And then she closed her eyes. The Amazons withdrew, carrying their queen in silence. Hercules did not chase, he did not speak. He returned to his ship with the belt, and a weight on his soul heavier than any labour he had ever known. The 10th labour was done, but no songs were sung and no crowds cheered. And in the years to come, when Hercules remembered his trials, it was not the monsters or the battles that haunted him most. It was the moment when trust turned to tragedy, when two noble hearts were torn apart by the whispers of a god. And the lesson, that peace is not always strong enough to silence fear, but even in sorrow he carried the memory of Hippolyta with him. Queen, warrior, friend, and he never wore the belt, not once.